Welcome to another exciting edition of Trekosophy. Joining us in the studio this evening, his blood alcohol content is constantly shape-shifting all over the place. It's Brandon Kirby. And our fearless leader, the master of the Cardassian neck trick, it's Ben McLean.
Yeah, I just... The trouble is I keep confusing it with that Vulcan neck pinch.
And our technical guru, who once transformed himself into a rock for 3 days just to figure out if a rolling stone really does gather no moss, it's Chris McGee.
Yeah, but unfortunately, as a rock, I couldn't move, so I naturally gathered moss anyway. Sorry.
Okay. And I have disguised myself as Bill Allen, a.k.a. the guy in the red shirt. And this is Trekosophy, and tonight we're going to be talking about Odo.
My favorite character in all of Star Trek. Yay!
He was one of my favorites, too. He'd make
Well,
a top
earlier you
five
said he was the worst ever. Brandon, make up your mind.
I'm a bit bipolar.
What, he was so bad he was good?
No, I mean, I'm all over the place. I have a
I meant Odo.
love-hate relationship with absolutism, and Odo represents that for me.
You can't be all over the place. Odo can be all over the place, but you can't be, Kirby.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if Odo... I mean, Odo's got it's like a limited absolutism. I mean, his absolutism is following the law.
That was supposed to be a joke.
Well, actually, it's not
Odo
even
can be all over the
law.
place.
Actually, it's not even law. I mean, he's the one who gives us the speech. Laws change depending on who's making them, but justice is justice. So it's really justice and not law that Odo regards as an absolute.
Exactly, and the distinction between law and justice is very much lost in this society. It's completely lost in political institutions. There's absolutely no hope. No, I don't even imagine that the situation would ever change. I can't imagine how it would. And even in Deep Space Nine, which is the apostle of imagination of what could happen, Odo takes a stand against it. And in that discussion whereby he dismisses the laws and says, but justice is absolute, he's immediately shot down by Sisko and ignored. And so in that sense, I want to start off on a positive note. I find there's something admirable about his idealism. It's just totally unattainable. There's kill all the lawyers. Never has there ever been a more beautiful sentiment uttered. In Odo, he doesn't utter it, but
he does seem to represent that in some ways.
Yeah, I have no use whatsoever for a lawyer. I've never actually met one who's capable of critical thought. I've met several, just not one capable of critical thought. And consequently, to acknowledge the distinction between thinking about justice and legality, I do admire that.
The thing is,
could I give an example of what Brandon just said real quick?
Sure, and then we'll go to Bill.
Yeah, and then we'll go to Bill.
So,
in conversations with fellow conservatives, there's a lot of people who are opposed to a lot of the things that have been going on with immigration. And they'll say that the government ought to be enforcing the immigration laws we have. Okay. But I'll hardly ever hear anyone try to justify those laws. They'll say, oh, we ought to be enforcing the law. But they'll never say why those laws are justified, why we ought to have those laws, why we shouldn't change those laws. And so they never look at the issue in terms of justice. It's only in terms of legality.
They probably assume that the laws are just.
I think they do, and that's not a safe assumption.
Right, I agree. Go ahead, Bill. No. You had something in mind you wanted to say?
Well, kind of along that track, but I do think we may be giving Odo a little too much credit, because while he may say justice is what it's all about and it's not about the laws, he never really will break a law for the sake of justice. I mean, he was apparently a satisfactory enough lawkeeper, whatever his title was, under the Cardassians that they kept him on the job. So he was making the Cardassians happy, and they're sticklers for that whole Orwellian obedience to the rules and regulations kind of thing. So I'm not sure if we can say he ignores law. I think he sees that law is justice, and you have to make justice work within the scope of whatever laws are in play. If the laws change, you can change what you do, but he still obeys the law. I mean,
Odo does believe, like most cops, in working through the system primarily. But he isn't afraid to go off the reservation when he finds that it's necessary, and he does on several occasions.
I don't know about several. Later on, he does. Eventually, later on, he does. The first few seasons, not so much. And eventually,
well, there wasn't very much call for it in the first few seasons.
Well, that's the thing. It's like I think Odo had the best bit of growth as a character because he went from somebody who really didn't care about other cultures. It doesn't matter whether it's the Cardassians or the Federation. His job is to enforce the laws and keep the peace, and that's what he's going to do. And by the end of it, he had actually started to pick up on some of those Federation ideals that weren't really a part of his makeup before, about looking for justice outside the law, looking for justice in and of itself, and not justice within the framework of a series of rules and laws.
He might have had some character growth, but I don't think his position on the distinction between law and justice changes substantially over the course of the show. We could get into specific examples, but I think the burden of proof would have to be on you on that one.
Okay. First couple of seasons, he's generally giving Sisko as hard of a time as anybody else because he thinks Federation regulations are really stupid, but he's still obeying. He doesn't just ignore the regulations. There's a handful of times when Sisko says, you can't do it that way. This is what the Federation regulations say. And Odo says, that's really stupid, but okay, fine, we'll do it that way. He always, even when the laws were ridiculous, pointless, irrelevant, he would still obey those laws. So I think it's, he might not care who makes the laws, but he still cares that there's some type of laws in place. You can't just rely on people to be just for the sake of justice. There needs to be a structure to it.
I think what Odo respects most of all, and I think this echoes through his character throughout the entire show, is what he says in the beginning of The Circle. He says that having a personal code is really the most important thing for Odo. Not that you should disobey laws whenever they get in your way, but that your life overall should be guided by a personal code of ethics that doesn't change just because the rulers change. And he holds that view, that there's something more important than the particular laws of a given society throughout DS9 from the first episode to the last. There's never a point where I think that's ever in question for Odo. On the other hand, he doesn't always follow even his own personal code. He gives in to temptation a few times against his own principles on a few occasions, like I think we all do sometimes. But that's something which he doesn't get from the Federation. Well, on the other hand, he might get more of a stress on due process from the Federation, which he didn't have before.
I just wanted to point out, though, that Bill's point, as near as I understood it, and I have to confess I am almost certain I didn't understand it. Bill's point wasn't lost. Power without justice is tyranny, and justice without power is idealism. You can't really have one without the other. And so Odo's growth as a character might embody that, because you can be as just as you like, but if there's nothing to back that up, it's completely useless. And if you have something to back it up but no justice, it's actually wicked. But in either case, it's not good. Whatever it is, it's not good.
Yeah, I think you might be giving me a little too much credit. I wasn't quite going that deep. I was looking at it more from the angle of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I mean, there's a lot of times when every captain, every Federation crew, at least the ones we've seen, they break the rules, they bend the rules, they twist the rules into pretzels, and as long as it all works out in the end and it did good, everybody's okay with it. They're interested in the spirit of the law, the end result. You know, Kirk sabotaged Federation property, committed like umpty-jillion counts of high treason, but he brought Wales back in time and saved the entire Federation. So we're going to give you your own ship and just tell you not to do it again. So, you know, committing treason is forgivable because he pretty much broke every law there is and got a slap on the wrist instead of getting a real punishment. Odo would have fried Kirk in whatever the Starfleet equivalent of the electric chair is in the beginning. He was a letter of the law guy. It's all well, I mean, he was all about justice, sure, that's what he says, but he was also all about the letter of the law. By the end of the show, he'd come to understand that Federation outlook towards the spirit of the law, and that was where his growth came in, because you can say he was interested in justice and not laws, but I think it has to do with his nature as a shapeshifter, maybe. I don't know.
I was going to bring up a point about nature as a shapeshifter in a second, but first I might say, yeah, I think you are correct that he does gain more of an appreciation for the spirit of the law as the show progresses, and I'm not sure that's entirely due to the Federation, although the Federation might get some credit. I think part of that might be due to his seeing a contrast between himself and the Founders, seeing the Founders as, you know, radically unjust, and seeing that his own moral code being so completely inflexible defeats its own end some of the time, and makes him like the Founders in ways that he doesn't respect. So I think that actually did get him to soften up his some of his more sharp edges toward the end of the show. I might say Odo presents us with a fascinating duality in a character, in that he is a shapeshifter who is known for his absolutely unbending refusal to compromise on his ethics. And don't you notice that's sort of a paradox in a way? The one character who can completely change into anything is totally resistant to change in his ethics.
Oh, interesting.
Well, that actually makes, I mean, I wouldn't say it's paradoxical.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a paradox, but
I mean, or it's not even like a contradiction in his own nature, because he is essentially formless. He's just a puddle until he applies himself and strives to make himself shaped into something with form, with structure. He creates structure out of structurelessness. He creates order out of chaos. That's the very nature of shape-shifting into something, is to put order where there was no order before, which would explain why he is so keen on the law and on justice and on his job as a cop.
Bill, you know, you're a beautiful human being, but I totally disagree with you. Odo's ability to shapeshift, form order out of chaos, is to me the perfect reason why you would expect him to be so flexible. I don't want to say ephemeral, but or evanescent or anything like that, but you would expect him to be more flexible, in my judgment, because he could see things from so many different perspectives. If he wants to see something from the perspective of a pig, for example, and understand veganism, well, he can do that better than any of us. And yet he's so inflexible. He doesn't see things from other perspectives. He has his own myopic perspective. And he's the absolutist who can change more than any of us, but does not change. And I appreciate the paradoxical nature of it. Yeah, I really do.
I think what Bill says is there is a grain of truth in it. I don't think he's entirely wrong. I think what you just said, Brandon, is right, but Bill makes an excellent point that Odo has to get up every morning and form himself into the kind of person he wants to be. And I think that is a good metaphor for each of us building our individual characters and how we live our lives. You know, that you can decide what kind of shape you want your life to take. You know, and for Odo, he takes a stand that he's going to be this, you know, this policeman. He kind of sees himself, I guess, as a sort of superhero because he, you know, stops the bad guys and protects the innocent and so on, catches criminals. And he didn't have to be that. He could have been anything. But he chose to take the stance, both physically and ideologically, that he ends up taking, you know. And so there's something to respect about that. On the other hand, he especially in the beginning, he could often be a little bit too inflexible or too much about the letter of the law than the spirit of the law in the beginning. I think that much is true. It makes an interesting metaphor there that he has to choose to be the shape he is, you know? I kind of expected one or more of you guys would interrupt me, and none of you have. What's going on?
Sorry about that, bro. You're actually, you know, you're saying some interesting things. Ordinarily, I'd take an invitation to interrupt you and just jump on it to steer the directions of the conversation elsewhere. But you're really laying down something really interesting. Odo can choose to be a certain way. He is that certain way. And finds that that's the correct way that one ought to be.
Well, I don't think Odo's always the correct way for everyone, but I do think there's something, I guess praiseworthy might be the word, noble, I guess might be the word. I'm not sure. I think another part of it might be, though, that Odo sees that he could just sort of drift away because he can turn into a cloud, you know. He could just sort of get lost in this universe of being a shapeshifter without even taking humanoid perspectives to things at all, and could end up falling below the level of rational thought altogether. He could see just sort of a chaos in all the different forms that he could assume. And he assumes this one form and this structured outlook, and this is probably true of founders in general, as the only alternative to the chaos that their existence would otherwise be, you know. Because, you know, us human beings, we typically do a lot better if we have a home to go to when we're at the end of the day, you know. A home where we put our stuff and prepare our food and where we feel safe to go to sleep at night and all that sort of thing. But a shapeshifter is almost by definition someone with no home or no sense of that, right? Because there's nothing in particular about the space they inhabit that sort of makes it theirs any more than the fly on the wall. Because they could be the fly on the wall, you know? There's no way to really adapt a space to give him as a shapeshifter the same sense of ownership that one of us might have in our space and our possessions, at least in the beginning. This is true of the early seasons. Does anyone get what I'm saying here? This structured view of the world as an alternative to the chaos that would otherwise be there because of the shape-shifting ability.
Well, I do, but I have a problem with it. I think I get what you're saying. and correct me if I've totally missed it. Odo can choose to be any way he wants. And so he chooses to have a certain face. Truth be told, though, he can't get it quite right. He's always had a hard time with it. In Odo, the person who thinks justice is justice can't quite arrive at what? Total truth. And I feel as if there's something Socratic, where in Plato's dialogues they say, well, what is justice? But nobody can quite say what it is without Socrates cutting them to pieces. And Ben, you and I have talked many times about the natural law and how we're both at heart natural law ethicists, but even when I read Aquinas, I feel as if he's my teacher. Over the centuries, there's this disciple relationship. He couldn't quite get at it. And there's something elusive about absolutist ethics whereby they can't quite put their finger on it. And it's the same way with Odo. Yes, the idea of absolute justice seems logically necessary because the reverse is logically absurd. When you say there is no right and wrong, you're saying that the view that there is a right and wrong is wrong. So it's self-defeating in an ultimate sense. But I've always been a little bit suspicious of the dogmatists, the Odo types. The shifters, the absolutist, and defining the absolute is so difficult in the same way as defining a face is so difficult. I've always thought that was worthy of consideration in a discussion of Odo. Feel free to refute me.
No, I think that makes sense, and I think that's true of every one of us, even those of us who are the most ethical in our behavior and our outlook. We still don't get it quite right. So the metaphor goes all the way down of getting up in the morning and forming yourself into this face and then not being able to get it quite right. But it having a certain definition that does give an indication of the right. You know, isn't it the New Testament phrase, we see as though through a glass darkly? Isn't that in the New Testament? I think it is.
Yeah,
it's saying, yeah, it's in St. Paul. And even though we might not be able to give an easy universal definition of justice that works for all instances and has no exceptions whatsoever, I think it's important to recognize that even if we don't have the words to express it, there is such a thing out there. There is a real right. There's a real right and wrong in the final analysis, even if we don't know all of it. But I think the parts we do know, we ought to be making the best use of we can. We ought to give forming that face the best shot we can.
Sure, but there's something enormously comforting when you can look at a Kira Nerys and say, did she do the right thing in bombing some Cardassian facility which also can kill the Bajoran civilians? You know, I don't know. I'm not God. And when you can say, I don't know, I think you've done an enormous disservice to the project of Odo, whereby he can say, you know what, I know enough to say so-and-so deserves to die. He made the wrong decision in certain cases. Because he made the wrong decision, he's done something terribly unethical. His concern with ethics was so huge that he had become an absolutist and had done unethical things in executing people who did not deserve to die.
Who's he? You mean Odo in his career as a policeman?
Well, yes. You remember there was an episode where Garrick, Cisco, and I think was it Julian? One of the other crew members. They had traveled back in time, only to find Odo was executing people without due diligence. But he thought justice was absolute, so he was going to kill them anyways. I've always prided myself on the knowledge of Star Trek, and I'd be truly ashamed if somebody could correct me on that. But it was a brilliant episode, and so I would accept the correction gladly.
As I remember,
that one. It was a weird changeling mind meld kind of thing. They were semi-linked, and they thought they were stuck in the past, but they were stuck in one of Odo's nightmares for the one time when he did everything by the book, and he got the wrong guy, and the wrong man was executed for the crime.
I know your concern for justice, which was so much to the extent that you are no longer concerned for justice. Some people can be so concerned for health that it becomes unhealthy. You could be so in love with money that you pursue some venture that's not profitable.
That's certainly true, and it can happen. However, in that episode, if I remember correctly, Odo was haunted by the possibility that he'd gotten a case wrong. And that's something that every cop who ever pursues the bad guys it has to deal with. The possibility that they could have gotten a case wrong. I mean, every cop has to deal with that. This isn't anything that's particular to Odo. It's more about the profession.
Yeah, but the question was, what was Odo's due diligence? A simple love of justice seemed to be his only due diligence in that case. Which is,
I think, in a situation like that, that's why you do need to try to separate the concept of justice from any kind of concept of what's right and what's wrong, because a cop who hesitates at the wrong time because he's pondering over whether it's right or wrong is a cop who ends up dead. And it's one of those situations where, yes, sometimes the wrong guy goes to jail, but
good point.
You gotta get over it. And I think that was part of what bugged Odo, is that he was part of why he was haunted by this particular one. He did everything right. He did it by the book, and he got the wrong answer. And once he knew he had the wrong answer, it bothered him because he did everything right, which meant he should have gotten the right answer. And that just didn't sit well with him. And regular cops, they have to learn to shrug that off and go through it. You can't hesitate or second guess yourself too much, or you'll wind up dead.
Yeah. Now,
right.
Even though that episode might be a bad example of what Brandon's talking about, I think Brandon does have a point.
No, I don't.
That an obsession with any one thing, if it's pursued to the greatest extreme, can in the end defeat its own ends. C.S. Lewis gives a story of this in The Abolition of Man. He says, an Irishman discovered that a certain kind of stove could heat his home with half the fuel. It would cut his fuel bill in half. And so he reasoned that 2 stoves of the same kind would enable him to heat his house with no fuel at all. And sometimes another step in the same direction will defeat its own ends. It won't actually end up being in the same direction.
I'd like to interject one little thing here. The episode that you all are discussing, it's from season 5, called Things Past. And an interesting little tidbit about this is that at the end of it, he, of course, admits that in that past, he did not do his due diligence and so forth, and Kira confronts him about that, and she needs to know from him that no other innocent people have died on his watch. And that's where the episode ends. He does not answer, actually. He replies that he doesn't know, but he sincerely hopes not. And it was a nice little bit of sort of she now has a little bit of distrust in him there. And it's almost a mirror of a season 2 episode, Necessary Evil. And it was where a case was reopened from before the Federation took over.
That was the one where Kira was a suspect, right?
Yes, that is correct. And at the end of that one, she, of course, she was a suspect. She, I think, was the one that actually killed someone, or what was it exactly?
Yeah, she was the one guilty of the crime Odo was investigating. At the time, she had said, I have an alibi, but my alibi is I was in the resistance planting a bomb across town, so I didn't commit this murder. But if you tell the Cardassians what I was doing instead of committing the murder, they'll kill me anyway.
Yeah.
And Odo...
It turns out she was lying. She actually did do it.
And he said, you are a good liar after all.
But Odo's fixation on the law and everything like that meant he was only interested in the murder, so he just said, yeah, I cleared her, her alibi checks out, and he moved on.
Yeah.
Hold on. That was
right
justice.
at the end of that.
That wasn't.
Right at the end of that episode is a mirror of the one you all were discussing, where she asks for forgiveness. She asks if he'll ever be able to trust her again in the same way, and he does not answer at all. That's where the episode ends on that.
Gee, for a guy who's so good at changing shape, he's not good at handling change, is he?
Yeah, that was the whole duality of Odo's character. I was going to say, Odo letting Kira go because she was in the Resistance, that was a political decision. That was him deciding that the Bajoran Resistance is actually a more worthy cause than the Cardassian occupation.
No, you're reading too much into it. He was there to investigate the murder. The Resistance, the politics, that was all secondary. It wasn't important. It wasn't part of it. He had to solve the murder. She wasn't the murderer. That was good enough for him.
I think that's what he told himself, but I really think that that was a political decision in the end. I mean, because the law against planting a bomb to sabotage a Cardassian operation was a much more important law than the one he was actually investigating. That was a much bigger deal.
At the time, he wasn't actually the constable. He was a random schlub they pulled in, and Dukat says, go solve this case. He hadn't actually
made any difference.
I mean, it kind of does.
Has a badge is going to make much of a difference to Odo.
No, I think it really does. It goes to what his character is. It's like we were talking about. He has to form his shape. He has to make his shape. He's like, I don't want to get involved. I'm not a collaborator. I'm not the Resistance. I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna figure out who killed the guy. I'll let you know that, and then I'll move, and then that's it. And after that, they made him a constable. But by then, it was, I mean, he eventually kept Kira's secrets. He didn't keep anybody else's secrets because he did round up Resistance people and hand them over for execution. So it's not like he was really dragging his feet in his official capacity.
No, he didn't round up Resistance fighters.
The episode that Kirby just talked about.
That one, that was an extreme case. That was the reason that bothered him, was because he didn't do that all the time.
The reason that bothered him was because he got the wrong guy.
Yeah, but
it wasn't the nature of what he had to investigate. It was he made a mistake and executed the wrong guy.
Odo did not use his position to undermine the Bajoran Resistance.
Nor did he use his position to support the Resistance.
Odo loves justice, and let's do a little bit of a meta narrative, a little bit of an eisegesis, a little bit of a leave Trek for a little bit. Red alert, if you must. But you've got justice, and that's all our favorite episodes because we're all guys and we remember what they were wearing. And When has justice ever been a set of laws? Said Riker at the end of the episode.
That's simple.
A codex of absolutes. I don't recall the quotation. One of you must. Between the four of us.
Wesley on death row for the frisbee.
Yeah, Wesley hadn't done something meriting death, and yet they were going to kill him. They said, okay, here's your laws of absolutes, but he hasn't warranted this. And so you've goofed. Your view of justice as the absolute didn't capture it. And I find that extremely significant. Odo couldn't quite capture it. Much as I love Odo, great actor, great character, absolutely enamored with the interplay between he and Moaxana. Chaos and structure. Wish I'd put that in my book now that I think about it in hindsight. Certainly kick myself.
The sequel.
Exactly.
The sequel.
2.0.
Loved it. But be that as it may, justice, the absolutist mindset, couldn't capture the essence in and of itself. And as a matter of fact, at times, it tended to deviate from that which it was trying to capture. In short, Odo tended to deviate from justice in the same way in the episode Justice, the absolutists moved away from justice by virtue of trying to capture justice. They were too fanatical about it.
I think we covered that already. I mean, I said, I think early in the show he does. I think early in the show he does take too much of a literal approach to the rules early in the show, and as he goes through the show, it gets later in the show, he takes more of a spirit of the law kind of view. But I think something important we really do have to say here is we have to separate the concept of meta-ethical absolutism from ethical/political absolutism. In meta-ethical absolutism is the idea that there is a right and wrong, and that it's an absolute, it doesn't change, it's universal across all cultures, and from it we can derive criticisms of different cultures and say that some cultures are actually better than others. For example, the United States, despite having the Japanese internment camps and so on, was in fact better than Nazi Germany, because we didn't actually go and kill millions and millions of people, at least not on a racial basis, but and as part of an actual declared war. On the other hand, that idea, being a meta-ethical idea, does not entail any actual specific content to your ethics. It doesn't say that the absolute standard of right and wrong is Kant's standard or Bentham's standard or Aquinas' standard or even Jesus' standard. It doesn't say what the standard is. As a meta-ethical view, it's only the view that there is such a standard. When we get into absolutism on the ethical side, not in meta-ethics, but in ethics, that is when we are taking some particular view on ethics and are dogmatizing it, and even to the point where we assume that it is complete and perfect. And that, I think, is when we start to run into problems. I think we can certainly have ethical standards and believe them to be an important component in the objective, the objective right and wrong. On the other hand, I think we need to recognize our views on ethics are not complete, because we can't, give that easy definition of justice, for example. And we don't always know the right in every single situation. On the other hand, we know that it's wrong to go around randomly stabbing other people in the face for no reason. We know that's wrong. And there's no wishy-washiness about that. We know that's wrong. That's definite. Okay.
Amen.
So there is a point in which you can say on some things, you know what, that's just wrong. We have to be able to say we
Sometimes
do
you get
know
straight.
some things. We do know some things. We might not know everything about ethics, but there are some things we do know, and those things are absolutes.
Well, oh my goodness.
If I say it's wrong to go around randomly stabbing other people in the face for no reason, that's an absolute.
No, that's actually kind of wrong. There are some tribes. In fact, the book that I'm reading now mentioned that there are even tribes out there that one of their things is to go out and cut off the heads of people. Not just a vengeance. That would be understandable at least, but just random people. If I could quote the exact name of the tribe and their country or whatever their little nation state is or whatever, I would, but unfortunately I don't have that information handy. And
I'm saying that's wrong, period.
Well, that's because that's your ethics, and that's wonderful. That's my ethics too. That's our morals, I should say, not ethics. But theirs is clearly different. And does that, make it morally right or wrong?
Which of us are correct?
That's the thing about morality. Is there correct or not correct?
Well, I'm saying there has to be. There has to be. Now, either we're right and they're wrong, or they're right and we're wrong, or we're both wrong. But we can't both be right.
Well, why not?
That's logic. That's logic. That's the law of non-contradiction.
Honestly, I don't know. This is way beyond me, but we're also at the end of our podcast episode here, so we're reaching some deep topics that are going to require hours of conversation.
Well, sure, they'll come up again, though.
And I don't want to say that the point is lost on me that the law of non-contradiction grips us. Because, Ben, you know as well as I know that logic is a commanding thing. And if you don't conform to it, it's because you're wrong.
Pretty much.
Yeah. And there's not a whole lot of, if you disagree with that, that's fine, but I'm not willing to listen to you. And that's the end of the discussion. I honestly believe that. It really is fine. If somebody disagrees with logic, I'm not going to waste my time, and the person I disagree with shouldn't waste theirs, and we can love each other, but let's not talk philosophy because that's a complete waste.
Yeah, well, Thomas Paine said that arguing with the man who's renounced the use of reason is like administering medicine to the dead.
Well, and G.K. Chesterton, who wrote a brilliant book on paradoxes, but also on the suicide of thought for when you deny reason. But with justice, I think you arrive at certain paradoxes when you take the absolutist view, which seems to be logically mandated and logically commanded. You still arrive at certain impasses which are very difficult to resolve. And I think this episode has gone to show some of that, and I hope to illustrate it in the future. I wanted to touch on Sisko being willing to sacrifice Jake to the battle for the power race and the prophets. We didn't get there, but we are going to get there in future episodes.
Yeah, that definitely would be beyond the scope of an Odo episode, I'd say.
No,
another point at some time when we're doing an Odo episode, we should probably talk about Odo and Worf. I mean, there was only one episode where they really sat down and said, this is my way, this is your way. But it is an interesting dichotomy considering how no matter who's in charge of security on any version of Star Trek, they all tend to really stink at their jobs because so much stuff goes down that they're supposed to prevent. They never stop it. Mm-hmm. But it would be interesting to look at the style of Worf versus Odo.
I think that would be an excellent episode. I don't know what's in the pipes for next. Why don't we end?
Well, first of all, any final thoughts on Odo for this?
Well, I think that Odo's absolutism on a meta-ethical level, that there is a real right and wrong, is entirely correct, period. I think I don't necessarily agree with every single decision that Odo makes as actually reflecting that. I don't even share the same principles he shares, because sometimes he acts against his own principles, and sometimes I don't agree with his principles. But the thing is, I do believe that there is an answer. Even though we might not always know it, there is an answer, and we know some parts of it. We don't know all of it, though. But I think there is an answer, and we know some parts of it. And in that sense, I'm an absolutist. But I do recognize there are problems when you try and push your own ideas too far, and you confuse your own ideas for that objective standard when your ideas aren't the same thing as that objective standard. That's what objective means. See, objective, when it comes to, when somebody says something is objective, that means your opinions about it can be wrong. And only if there is such a thing as a correct answer is it possible to be wrong. And so in defending the idea of an absolute standard of right and wrong that's objective, I would defend the idea that it's possible for me to be wrong. So, I mean, that's my defense of absolutism. It's an insistence that it is possible that I can be wrong.
Can I offer
go ahead.
Kierkegaardian perspective? Had Kierkegaard watched Deep Space Nine, I think he would have said something like this. Odo, the fellow most concerned with absolutism and changelessness, could never avoid change. He is necessarily forced into altering himself. Likewise, he could never arrive at a stagnant view of justice, or to a place whereby we would all uphold his ethical character, because that view necessarily ends in something unpalatable. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think if we're going to end on an existentialist note, I guess we might say that every morning we have to get up and decide what kind of people we're going to be. And we have to form that face, and we might not always be able to get it exactly right, but make it a good one. That's what I'd say. Yeah.
All right. Well, Bill, take us out.
Thanks for listening, folks. This has been another exciting episode of Trekosophy. Thank you, Ben, Brandon, and Chris, for helping us get through another night. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, email us at trekosophy@gmail.com. Check out our various web-type presences, download us in the Apple iTunes store, and we'll see you next time. Man, it's been so long since I've done one of these intros, I've almost forgotten how.
Let me get my notepad out and I'll start writing views that contradict Ben's so we can have an interesting episode.
Gee, I know most of the Bogart stuff myself, sweetheart. I'm not sure if I could manage to do a Mike Hammer.
You're wonderful human beings, but I've got to call it an evening.
Well, hold on though, Brandon.
I know
We've got to decide what we're doing next week first.
Ben, you've got 1 hour. Make it quick.
Emus, man. It's all about the emus. 20 years ago, emu farms were all the rage. Everything was going to be emus as far as the eye could see. Invest in an emu farm. That's what we got told. And all these people invested, and then the whole market dropped out of the emu thing. So where are all the emus? I'm just saying, that was right about the time they brought back the McRib.
Wasn't Kiss Me Deadly one of the books Odo was reading? Ben? I'm all alone.
I've got joy, joy, joy down in my heart. Where?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but that Nietzsche thing, now I'm just stuck thinking of Groucho Marx. Either this god is dead or my watch has stopped.
Yeah, it's Cardassian neck trick. As distinct from the Vulcan neck pinch.
Yeah, you don't want to get those two confused. The Vulcans aren't quite so much fun at parties.
Don't worry, I'm putting my shiznit in this shiz.
Oh, good.
I have it off steam.
Here goes Kirby, pissing off.
Are you guys still there?
Well, we're not all together there, if you know what I mean.
Were we ever there? There's your question. What are we even talking about tonight?
Day 17 of the expedition. The crew is getting restless. Still no sign of the elusive Twinkie as we plumb the depths of the Walmart. I don't know if it's a Jacques Cousteau thing or a Mutiny on the Bounty thing. Jacques Cousteau leads the Mutiny on the Bounty, but man, I want some Twinkies!